Hello, and welcome to another episode of Intersections, Policy, Program, and Practice Exchange. My name's Elisa Gwilliam, and today I have the pleasure to be speaking with Executive Director of Mental Health America Dutchess, Andrew O'Grady, and Professor of Psychology and Director of the Center for Aging and Disability Policy at Mount St. Mary College, Dr. Larry Force. Andrew, you want to get us started?
Yeah, let's get started. So I'm really happy. Larry will reintroduce everybody to Vance Larson, who's been on this before. He was such a great guest. We had him again today to talk about the opioid crisis in this country. And, you know, it's a big problem right now. There's a lot of people who are struggling with this. And I do believe the whole reason we did this online was because of the isolation related to COVID and where it all kind of sent us. And a lot of people are struggling in their house by themselves with many addictions. Just on a call before this, talking about gambling addictions and how it's popping up all over the country that you can pick up your phone and just start gambling with it. And people are doing that and they're spending their money before they even make it. They're sitting home waiting for the next paycheck to pay off the bills of the gambling they did. And it's a problem. So addiction is a problem in many areas. And today we want to focus on opioid use. And so I'll turn it over to Dr. Force.
Thank you, Andrew. And thank you, Alyssa, for stitching this together. And Vance, you know, as always, we're grateful for your presence and the voice of your experience. Vance and I came in contact a year and a half ago. I know he's very modest about this, but if you're on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, there's probably not a day that goes by that you're not interfacing with Vance messages. And the reason is because he's an influencer and he has a great voice and a great, a great message. He comes to the table with years of mental health experience, martial artist, case manager. And I really think that there's a real value add for having this discussion today. And why today? Well, Andrew talked about, the issue of, COVID. We see, whether it be child abuse, addictions, elder abuse, when people were confined, they had free reign over some of their behaviors. As I mentioned before offline, and proper introduction, my name is Dr. Larry Force, and I'm a professor of psych at Mount St. Mary College. And I run a Center on Aging and Disability Policy with my dear friend and colleague, Jeff Kahana. And here come the phone calls. And the phone calls are about, listen, I've been on these medications for long periods of time and I want to come off. Why now? I think probably because the world is opening a little bit. And I think that people coming out realize that family members, what do we know that's coming up? Thanksgiving. What typically happens at Thanksgiving? Well, in the college age students, typically we see college students maybe going home for the first time since September, and parents being aware that maybe something's not right. Maybe something's not right with their affect, maybe something's not right with their eating patterns, but something's not right. And the reason is because it's the first time they're coming in contact with each other. I think the same thing here. People are now coming back into the workplace. People are now coming back into family settings. And one call I recently had, the person was very clear that the family's all over them because they're very concerned. So I think with that, Vance, if you could talk a little bit about what a day looks like in your life from the treatment approach, but as a caseworker, but also if you could talk a little bit about the historical perspective. I know that at one point you had moved far ahead in launching a program dealing with opioid use and misuse. So with that, we'd like to introduce Vance Larson.
Well, thank you. And I appreciate the opportunity to come and speak again. And when you sent me a text last week and asked me if I'd be a part of the program, initially I turned it down just because my schedule is so hectic. But it took me all about 5 minutes, and I circled back to you and I said I do it because it's important. And little did I realize at that time what today is, and it's kind of a somber day for me. Um, Today actually marks the 2-year anniversary, actually tomorrow, that my own daughter passed away from opiates. She died of a heroin overdose alone in a row house in Baltimore. And so that's it makes it personal for me to be here today and to kind of share my perspective and my story and what it is to deal with people going through that process. So that being said, you mentioned, years ago, I had an opportunity to be a part of a program. It was just coming together. It was kind of a revolutionary approach where it was going to be a mobile treatment, mobile methadone project going into Baltimore City. And the reason being is because the methadone clinics were being overrun, and there are some barriers, people trying to get there and to try to maintain some sort of life by working. And so if we had this mobile treatment facility where people could come and, they would get their medications, they'd be seen by a doctor on board. I would work with them as a chaplain. We could meet all those requirements, and that whole process would take all of 5 or 10 minutes instead of the process of going through a traditional methadone program of getting there. And a lot of time that's going to come via state funding, via a taxi, or you have to find transportation, and you have to go through your group. So it's really a long, protracted experience. And so what we wanted to do is make it easier. When somebody is dealing with addiction, that window of them asking for help is very small. And so we wanted to try and simplify the process. We wanted to try and stack the deck to give everyone an opportunity when they were first motivated or excited about the life of living without said substance, to give them every chance that they possibly could to excel. Long story short, that program, we never got it off the ground. There were some bigger issues, but I liked the model. And what was interesting, prior to the program coming to an end, we were doing a lot of press. We got a lot of notoriety, a lot of handshaking with government officials. We were in the news pretty much on a daily basis. And at one point, what was interesting, a reporter kind of backed me into a corner, and she said to me, she says, Reverend Larson, because I am a chaplain. She said, what is your plan to convert all these people? And I just started laughing, and I said, listen, I said, I'm not here to convert anyone. I'm here to love them. And she didn't get it. But for me, the message that I want to put out there is that addiction is real. It's demoralizing. People have been through trauma. It's a hard camp and it's a hard life. And so for me, as a provider, as a clinician, as a case manager, as a chaplain, I just want to give them an opportunity to be themselves, to know that this time is sacred and that they are loved and there's no judgment. And that while they are going through this process, while it's going to be hard, there's going to be someone who's going to be in their corner without judgment, without any sort of pretense. I just wanted it to be a real exchange. And so, Larry, when you ask me about what my day-to-day experience is like as a case manager, for example, prior to going into private practice in the evening, I work with a lot of homeless individuals and a lot of homeless vets. And these are individuals who have served our country, and they may be suffering from PTSD or traumatic brain injury or something of that nature. And so a lot of times trauma is the gateway, I believe, to addiction. And so if I can not feel this by doing this, hence that's where the addiction cycle starts. So, I see a lot of people in my case management, during the day, and in the evening, The addiction component is people are reaching out, parents are reaching out, friends are reaching out. And you mentioned the COVID aspect. Yes, I think that there's been an uptick, with that social isolation. People started turning into, some high risk behaviors. And it might have started out as recreational, but you take somebody who is not in the best frame of mind and they have some resources, and all of a sudden you're off to the races. And so um, the uptick is there, it's real and it's relevant. And now is the time that we need to make this a conversation that everyone is willing to at least listen. You don't need to participate, but I promise you at some given point in time in your life, somebody in your family and your friend and your circle is going to be touched by addiction.
First of all, I want to say to you that, from the heart, there are no words, when you reference, your daughter. If there were words that could help make sense of this, we would provide them. One of the things I tell my students is you only get a chance to disclose once. So if somebody comes in and you're working with them therapeutically and you see a parallel and you want to tell them, hey, I only get a chance to disclose once. So you may want to hold off on that disclosure. So disclosure, I know how you feel. I mean, I lost my middle brother to active addiction, and he was a very successful guy. And he was sober for a long period of time, and then he stopped being sober. And one Christmas, I wrapped up a big book and put it by his door of his house, and he went berserko because it wasn't the gift he was looking for. But one of the things he said to me is, I said, come back, go back to the fellowship, come back. And he said, Larry, there's only one first kiss. And I was taken by that. And the fact is that he was a very successful guy that died a very horrific, lonely death at the age of 46. So people will say to me, because of the stigma of addiction and recovery, brother died. So what did he die from? I said, well, he tried to get 90 years of living into 46, and he wasn't that successful at it. And 3 days after he died, I went to my first Al-Anon meeting. And I walk in, and what's my story? My story is my brother died. What's my story? I help people, I don't even know their last names, and my brother slipped through my fingers.
Yeah. So
this short woman, after the meeting, came up to me. I never saw her before, I never saw her after. She said, she's looking up at me, she said, about your brother? I said, yeah. I thought she was going to say, I'm sorry. He was dead for 3 days. That's what people were saying, all prayers, I'm sorry. She said, oh, about your brother? And I said, yes. And she said, you're not that powerful. And my first response was, I don't want to say it on recorded line, but my first response to myself was, you got to be kidding me. But you know what? She's right. I wasn't that powerful. Families can't go in and rescue like on white horses. We know what we'd like to be. And look, the helping profession that all four of us are in, from different venues, but all four of us are in helping professions. And yet you want to try to fix things. Can't fix things. We're not that powerful. How did I work through it? This is like probably 30 years ago now. No, probably about 28 years ago. I just started at the college. I was there for a couple of years. So I created a course and I dedicated it to him. And it was called Addictions Across the Lifespan. And it was my way of trying to work through grief by creating something that was positive.
Yeah. Something. Lance, I want to echo what Larry said. I've spoken to you in the past before, and I can actually literally feel your pain through your conversation. So I'm really sorry.
I appreciate it.
You had that loss, and I can tell that you tried to design and develop and get to people, and you wish every one of those people was your daughter. So I can see that, and I can hear it. And same with you, Larry. I was in a little different boat, and I'm hoping, actually, I just had this idea last week that I would have my brother on here as a guest. And he lives down by you, Lance, in Baltimore area, just north of Baltimore. And he went down the road of the opioid stuff at a later time in life. I mean, he always dabbled in this and dabbled in that, but he was able to get through life. But then he was with some woman who started doing the pain medications, and he played around with it and started snorting it. And then all these people that loved him and that knew my parents would call up from Maryland and say, he's doing something he shouldn't be doing. And they would call worried, are you okay? Absolutely. Everything's fine. Everything's fine. He's a big guy and he weighs about 285 pounds. And they went down and visited him, and they walked into his development, and he walked out, and they walked right by them. And he said, Mom, Dad, he weighed 145 pounds. And his
Wow.
teeth were falling out of his head.
Yeah.
He had gotten into a lot of legal trouble. And anyway, thankfully, he was like 45 at the time. He got it. He ended up going back to college, got sober, went to a rehab facility, now has a master's in social work and works at a local hospital down there, helping other people. So anyways, 280 pounds. So, keep that weight on, buddy. Yeah. So, I mean, everything goes in a different direction. And I bet if that walking down the pathway didn't happen, he might not be here either. So,
and really, I mean, the impact on families. I mean, I think one of the things that's come across in the themes of what we've been talking about over the seasons here with the intersections exchange is that families get better slower. It's an insidious thing. And the best example that I can give is one of, I read a little pamphlet one time from the University of Rhode Island about the best way to cook a lobster. And it says, you don't take a lobster and throw it in hot water because it's cruel. You take a lobster, you put it in warm water, you turn the heat up, and the lobster falls asleep and doesn't know it's been cooked. And you know what? It's the same thing with addiction. I don't think anybody that we've dealt with, either professionally or personally within our own family system or professional network, ever said, I can't wait to become addicted. They thought it was just, a very, easy and how readily available it is. 2 years ago, I had a dental implant done. And the doc, great doc, on the way out says, here, I have a prescription for you, of oxycodone, for pain. I said, I can't take it. I said, I'm an Irish guy. He said, well, what are you worried about? Not about drinking with it? I said, no, what I'm worried about is that when I finish it, I'm going to be breaking into your office looking for more because of the fact that it's so insidious. There was a time that I had to use opioids because of a number of operations from 9/11. The guy said to me, every 4 hours, I was like 3 hours and 58 minutes, 3 hours. I was like a train conductor. So at the end of that month, I went back to him with the empty bottle, and he looked at me and he said, "You're going to love Tylenol." And but he was brilliant because he knew. We know, most of the people that I talk to that talk about, they don't come in through the illegal system. They come in through the prescribed system, and then burst over the boundaries of what's legal and what's not legal. So maybe you could talk a little bit about that, like, as far as a day in the life of how you see people, Thanksgiving's coming up. We do this whole thing on elder abuse. One of the things that, we put lights on all the time is that sometimes grandparents unknowingly are the drug dealers because people are in there, rifling through their medicine cabinets. Thanksgiving is coming up. Elder abuse is not just physical, it's financial, and it's also this violation of space. So maybe you could talk a little bit about the profiles of typically what you see, how people come in, but more importantly, how people move through it and get out.
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head. The vast majority of the people that I see, and granted, I was a crisis counselor in Baltimore for 20 years. And well, let me backtrack a little bit because you mentioned how the addiction affects the entire family. And very quickly, when I was first married, 20 years ago, I got called. It was in the first year of my marriage, and my wife, I was very successful. I had a thriving practice, and I got called to inner city Baltimore to go deal with one of my clients. He was ex-special forces, heroin addict. His girlfriend was a heroin addict. Long story short, he called me and asked me if I would go and try and rescue his girlfriend from, this drug den. And so I kissed my wife goodbye and I said, honey, I'll be back in a couple hours. It was like maybe 7 p.m. Long story short, it went very tragically wrong. I was there overnight. I was in an environment where a lot of drugs, a lot of guns. Guns were pointed at me. I wasn't successful and wasn't able to get my client's girlfriend out to at least, I wanted to get her over to the University of Maryland just to get a med check, blood pressure, just wanted to get her vitals, make sure she was okay. But several gentlemen, very large gentlemen with very large guns, told me go or, my life would, effectively be over. And so I left and I got home the next morning. It was, maybe 7 o'clock in the morning and the sun's coming up and my wife was there and she says, listen, she says, I love you. And this is one of the reasons why I'm attracted to you. And while I married you, is your compassion and your sense of dedication. But God damn it, you have a family, you're married now. You can't do that. And I don't know why that popped into my head, but from a clinician perspective, from a treatment perspective, there's all sorts of collateral damage, whether someone is actively in addiction or whether it's a provider, because a lot of times we do put ourselves at risk. We work long hours. We find ourselves in situations from a liability standpoint that maybe we shouldn't, and maybe that's just me. I know that it's not, because have had many conversations with other providers who have been down that road before. But the world of addiction, it spills over into every facet of our lives and our families specifically. But so, yes, to answer your question, that profile is that I see a lot of very good people making some very poor choices. And a lot of times, that comes via the medical community. And I don't want to point the finger and say they created a problem. I will say that there is the accessibility years ago of, getting that medication. It was very easy. And they were passing them out like Skittles. And so I think what we're seeing now is, people they weren't properly educated on what some of the pitfalls might be. And I think that's, where we've gotten into trouble as a society. And that's what I'm seeing. Those people who, in my own wife, for example, 8 surgeries. The last surgery was last year. And, she had some issues that were pushing into her spinal cord. And they said, we need to address this or you may be paralyzed. And so she's been on, hardcore medication, for the past 7 years. And we have a daily conversation about it. And we kind of go through where she's at and, how she's doing emotionally and how much medication we have left. And it's not because I don't trust her and it's not because she doesn't trust herself. It's just that we know firsthand what could potentially happen. And so, we're very responsible with that. But not everybody has that opportunity. Not everyone has a circle or a partner or a family that is understanding, that is going to be with them through their treatment approach. And that's where we get in trouble sometimes. We take the right amount of social isolation, we take the right amount of having a bad day or the pain that's associated with whatever it is that we're healing from or not healing from or not dealing with. And then the next thing we know, the hooks of addiction are in us. And that's where it becomes problematic for the individual, for the family, and for the community.
You bring up a very interesting point. I mean, we're not the antichrist of medication, psychotropic medication, pain medication. There's can be a real good place for those types of things. But you talked about, some of the steps, being able to give somebody else the medication to hold if you feel as though you have that addictive personality. This discussion about a daily discussion with your wife, brilliant. Okay, it's a safeguard. So this way it doesn't turn into something that is, out of control. I remember years ago, probably about 8 years ago, we were involved in a project, 7 years ago, a project with the local medical center. And the medical director comes in, and he just came back from a conference. And he said something I'll never forget. He said, what was learned at the conference was that the highest rate, the highest age of people becoming heroin addicted are people over the age of 50. And the reason is because of the fact that they're coming through the system, now regulated, okay? You know, with computer technology, pharmacies can talk to each other, doctors can talk to each other. There's a regulation on the number of medications that can be given, and people are going out to the street in order to get heroin. You know, and it's because when you think about heroin addiction, you think about it as a younger person's, you know, avenue. And yet he comes in and says, no, the highest demographic are people over the age of 50 because of the dependency on, you know, these types of medications. And Andrew, maybe you could talk a little bit about the agency profile, the types of things that you're seeing of people knocking on the door locally through mental health.
We're seeing all age groups. I did want to say though that I think one thing I learned from doing these intersections video casts is that the best thing we could do as family members is to do what Vance told that reporter, and you know, you're here to love them, and because I don't believe there's any, and we've asked almost every one of our guests who have come through recovery, what was that moment? And it was never about somebody said, you know, you should get clean, I'm here with you. It's never about that. It's always about I didn't want to live the way I lived, or I wanted to be a better me, it's their internal decision. And the only thing we can do is love them until that moment hopefully happens, and be there and remind them of the path. But it's got to be an internal thing that they're going to want to make that happen. And we've seen it happen of so many times. People have gotten clean and they've lived better lives. And many times it's anonymous. Well, maybe that's built into that one episode of that one intervention, Alcoholics Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous. I personally wish it wasn't so anonymous. I wish that people would celebrate it and talk about how they're clean, and anytime I see it on social media, I share it no matter who it is. I'm 2 years clean, I'm 1 year clean, because I want people to know that there's a lot of people out there like that are succeeding and doing wonderful things that have a history, and they turned it around. But it's very anonymous to them, and most of them don't want to know people know about it. But I think if more people knew about it, they would go. And I always say, you know, you have these walks on the bridge for breast cancer, for instance, breast cancer awareness, and you have thousands of people on a bridge with their pink stuff, and fantastic. I love it. But we tried to organize, you know, events for mental health or addiction, and so few people come out. But there are so many people out there. The biggest talk I ever went to was
but part of it is the whole stigma part of it.
Right.
I mean, you know, one of the principles of a fellowship is that anonymity is a spiritual foundation of the program. If somebody really needs to know, they know. But if someone need not know, that's not I don't see that as the playing card, because the fact, or the lead dog. You know, I have some friends that that's the lead dog. That works for them. It doesn't work for everybody. And I think that, you know, once we can try to figure out ways to destigmatize the addiction and the recovery process should be celebrated, but it gets celebrated in different ways. I mean, think about Alyssa, and Andrew, think about the people that we've sat across from, the people that are bubbly, have such high spirit, that are so engaging, and then they tell the story of where they were.
Yeah,
you can't believe it, you know, of the depth of the human condition that they went to, and then something happened. And here they are, you know, giving testimony.
Think about how much easy. So I believe that, you know, when somebody is, well, if you dial it back 100 years ago, cancer was the same thing. No one talked about it. It was a family secret. It was something that people were ashamed of. And, you know, and once it started becoming something that people rallied around and supported, that helps the human spirit heal quicker. And if we could, we will get to that point, but we will get to that point where and you know, cancer is treated with medication typically. I believe the human spirit has something to do with healing as well, but it's mainly the medication and the radiation and the treatment that's getting rid of this cancer. It's not a ton of the percentage of the amount a person has control over is minuscule, but in addiction, they have 100% control. So to have a bunch of people supporting them and rallying behind them and cheering them on when they got to year 1, year 2, how powerful is that? So
Yeah,
powerful.
But look at the way that the play, because I agree with you, the evolution. Years ago, it was all about abstinence. Today, we stand here as practitioners and talk about harm reduction. We talk about medicated assisted treatment. Those types of things would have been considered a loss, okay, 25 years ago. And today we celebrate that. I had coffee with a friend of mine. He came up from the South and we got together for part of the weekend. And I said to him, you seem to be different. Because he was a wild man. Okay. And I said, you seem to be different. He said, yeah, I've been sober about 120 days. I go to AA. He said, you know, I got high last night and I drink a little. And now 20 years ago, you would have said, hey, what are you kidding me? What are you kidding me? I mean, are you really sober? 20 years later, you say, hey, that's great. Okay, because he's trying, because there is evidence of harm reduction. Will he get to complete abstinence? I don't know. I mean, don't forget, there are guys in my generation that came out of the 60s where, you know, marijuana was considered to be illegal. Now we're talking about a complete change. You know, a complete change where not only is it used for medical intervention, but it can be sold in different states in stationery stores. Who would have thought? Storefronts, who would have thought? So there's been this evolution, you know? I mean, it's in my lifetime, did I ever think underneath Governor Nelson Rockefeller with the Rockefeller laws that we get to the point where, you know, police are being encouraged now not to arrest somebody they see them getting high on the street? Before they would have been tackled to the sidewalk, you know, so that there has been change.
Yeah.
Alyssa, could you just talk for a minute? You talked earlier on before we started this. You know, you're the CEO and founder of the Hudson Valley Healing Center. So here we sit as practitioners talking about, well, if you want to get off of opioids, now you can get on something else. You know, you can reduce that and maybe get on Suboxone. But you brought up an interesting point. Maybe you can talk a little bit about that, how people are now trying to use alternative or complementary and holistic approaches to come off of Suboxone.
Yeah, exactly. So we've been getting an increase lately of people on Suboxone coming in asking for specifically NAD treatments and going through the IV process of trying to remove a lot of that opioid left over from, I guess, regulation medication back into it. So I wanted to get Lance's opinion on, like, is that a great treatment? Do we see that being more nationwide? Do people even know that there are complementary medicines, or they're still DEA regulated IV controls, but they're allowing people to go to completely non-opioid based alternatives?
And Vance,
Yeah.
you want to address that?
Well, I mean, listen, you know, I've worked for, you know, many different treatment facilities, everything from the state run all the way to the, you know, the $30,000 a month cash out of pocket facilities, you know, celebrities, high profile people, that sort of thing. And typically the protocol is that unless somebody came in and there was, you know, a potential, unless they needed detox, a medical detox, you know, the protocol was specifically in the high profile treatment facilities is you would come in and it was all about relaxation, and it was about vitamin therapy, a lot of B vitamins, that sort of thing to regulate brain chemistry, a lot of sauna, you know, sit in the sauna several times a day, sweating and just kind of helping the body return to its natural state. And the mind control and getting the mind kind of situated and calming down and in sync with, you know, the rhythm of your heart rate and respiration and things of that nature. So, you know, I've always been a big advocate of, you know, Chinese medicine. I'm a proponent of yoga, acupuncture, Tai Chi, massage. All of these things I think are fantastic. And when we talk about, a treatment protocol for any addiction, once we get past that detox process, you know, I think anyone who is willing to try anything, um, provided it's science based, it's a good thing. I For me, I was never a drug user. I've always been very heavily into the sports, but I did start drinking. I had like a 4-year window where it really got out of control. And long story short, ended up in the hospital, and they said I was going to die, and I was like, no, I'm not. I'm going to be fine. And they circled the family around, and they said, your son's dying tonight. And so, long story short, I walked away from that. I never went to AA. I never saw a psychologist. I didn't engage in any of the treatment protocols. I went back to what I knew, and that was meditation through the martial arts. And that just kind of helped me prioritize and realign what I thought was important in my life. It gave me an anchor. And with that anchor, I was able to carve away hour by hour, and then eventually day by day, of how I wanted to create and respond to the trauma that I put myself through. So for me, if someone's trying, and I just go back to just giving them that space, that it might not be what I, as a clinician or as a coach or even a chaplain or even a family member, would want them to do. If they're willing to try, I'm going to back them. And then if that doesn't work, then we go to plan B or plan C. There's always something that we can do. And I think it's important that we don't stifle somebody's thought process and their recovery process, because I emphasize that it is their recovery process. The few times that I have gone to AA, for example, when they would ask me to come and speak and tell my story, I never self-identified as being an alcoholic, and I haven't had a drink in 30 some odd years. And a lot of the old comers would give me shit because I didn't self-identify as being an alcoholic, yet I was bleeding internally. I had multiple convulsions. Blood alcohol. I fit the profile clinically, but I didn't want to give the alcohol that power over my life. And I was thankful for the people in my life, including my physician, who said, Vance, if you got a handle on this, I'm going to trust you with this. But when you don't, you just need to know that I love you enough to know that I'm going to make these recommendations. And so we partnered on it. And to this day, thank God, we've been successful. So that's kind of how I've modeled my practice when I'm working with someone who is motivated to getting clean. I don't care that vehicle. I just want them to get there.
And that's the beauty of today. There are different doors. And now, one of the things I wrote about this week was about the impact of technology. Who would have thought, that 5 years ago, that we'd be talking about Zoom calls, for therapeutic intervention, phone calls, virtual reality. I mean, the world has completely changed, and all these are vehicles. As you're talking this through, Andrew and Vance and Alyssa, there are people that are listening to this that, or maybe seasoned practitioners. There are other people that are listening to this that, have 2 days of non-drug use, and their mind is twirling and things like that. What would be the collective message that you would give those people that are just coming into this world of recovery? And maybe, Andrew, you might want to go first.
That's a tough one, because in listening to this, I would say that, you have to find your own path. You have to find what works for you, that's going to keep you clean and sober. But I got to say that our treatment modalities our treatment programs in the community that one would typically go through does not accommodate that yet as much as it should. So, Vance said, no, I'm going to do it my own way, and this is it. And you had somebody on the side, a coach, saying, I'm here if that doesn't work for you, which is a good way to go. But you also, you have to find a balance, and there are many programs. Our agency runs a number of them that you can walk into, and we will start that journey with you. And there's help. But I got to tell you, there's the practitioners listening. There's probably many if you're a practitioner and you're listening, you might be of the mindset that I was taught 30 years ago, and it hasn't changed much, that somebody has to go to AA and they have to go to NA and they have to be completely sober, to Larry's point. Or you're starting over and you don't have day one and you have to get your coin, you have to do your amends, and you have to do this and that and the other thing. Now, it worked. It worked for my brother. It's phenomenal. It doesn't work for everybody. But I don't want that to be an excuse for somebody watching this that's 2 days clean, that the part of their brain is saying, it's right, it's not going to work for me. I mean, you have to jump into something, and you have to embrace it and grab that moment that you have of wanting to become clean and sober, and then find your path from there. I think that's the message that I would give people.
And Alyssa, from your perspective of the naturalistic healer perspective, what advice would you give somebody?
No, I think it really comes down to what Pema Chodron said, and that's fail again, fail better, but don't stop trying. And it's never giving up. And a lot of times it's not one thing, like a sauna for a week or a meditation class. It's the layering effect. Because as you start engaging more in the different layers, you start changing your ship 1 degree. And then over time, you're seeing the change. As you start going to these events and these retreats and these workshops, your social circle changes. You're introduced to different types of teas or different kinds of foods, or people are inviting you to do different things. And as you begin to change over time, you'll notice how far you've gotten. And sometimes when it comes to the natural healing methods, it's not the days that you feel the change, but at the end of a year, it's looking back and seeing the change over a year.
And Vance, as we bring this to close, some summary statements regarding that particular question. The person, the group in front of you, a couple days sober, and what comments would you be able to share with them, or thoughts?
It's interesting that we are ending on this note. Someone just asked me the other day, they said, Vance, how come you get up every morning and you're in the gym at 4:30? And, I've written about this extensively, and the smart ass in me. Listen, when I was in my 20s, I would get up and work out because I wanted to look good naked. That's the truth. I'm pushing 60 now. And now I get up and I work out because I'm worth it. And so I would tell that to the person who has 24 minutes, 24 hours, 24 years in recovery process. You're worth it. Whatever it is that started you on that addiction process, whether it was trauma, whether it was abuse, whether it was medications, I don't know. And I don't need to know. I just need for you to know that you're worth it, and it's worth it. It really is. So whatever it is, whatever bit of intensity that you have, and I discuss this with my military friends and especially my special forces people that I often work with from time to time. You've got to cultivate that place in your mind where everything is possible. And if you can get there, you can withstand, those dark, lonely hours where you feel like you just can't breathe. I promise you, you can. It's not going to be easy and it's not going to be fun. But if you hone in on you're worth it, maybe you'll just get there.
I love that. And the takeaway that I have from the three of you goes back to my buddy that raises his hand and says, I have 110 days of sobriety. He said, isn't it funny that the first half of our life, we try to figure out ways to kill ourselves. And the second half of our life, we try to figure out ways to stay alive. And I think that, the larger takeaway, and I think we're evidence of that, personification of it, you don't have to do this alone. There's no judgment. You don't have to do this alone. Right. I mean, you want to reach out to Andrew and Andrew's group, Alyssa and Alyssa's, group, Vance, myself. You don't have to do this alone. So thank you all. And Alyssa, at this point, I'd like to turn it back to you. You can get the contact information from Vance, and tip of the hat, Vance. Thank you.
And Vance, thank you so much for being with us today. And on behalf of all of us, as tonight comes to an end and tomorrow begins, that we're there for you and your family in our thoughts and in our prayers. And if someone wants to reach you, what's the best way for them to get a hold of you?
Simply the best way to reach me is my cell, 410-533-6219. I get it. I pick it up as often as I can, although I have a busy schedule. So if I don't, please leave me a message and I will get back to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And thank you for joining us today. You've been listening to Intersections Policy, Program, and Practice Exchange. And if you want to watch this podcast again, share it with friends, or leave a comment, log on to our website, www.intersections-exchange.org.